Hi, it's Sherri from A Quilting Life, and today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my upcoming book, Labor of Love, Scrappy Quilts from the Heart of Home, which releases in just a few days. I'm super excited about this book and can hardly wait to share it with everyone. Things were a little bit different this time around. I was supposed to have a big release for the book at Quilt Market, but Quilt Market was canceled this year. So my publisher has all of my quilts, and I'm not sure when I'm going to get those back. So we're going to do something a little bit different today, and I will be showing you pictures of the quilts while I talk about all of the details and information about them. So you can find just a little bit more about them and get a sneak peek inside the book. The quilts that I actually have on the table are from my previous book that came out last June, Sunday Best Quilts, that I co-authored with Corey Yoder. And so I just have them kind of here on the table along with the sampler quilt that I made from that book. And I'll be talking a little bit more later about a sampler option that we'll do from Labor of Love. So let's get started. I'll show you a little bit of inside the book, what kind of things you can expect, and then we'll go through all 12 quilts and projects one by one. So I just want to real quickly flip through and just show you a few things about this book. It has absolutely beautiful photography. There are little tip sections where I give you ideas about using your scraps and other organizational methods. As I said, the photos are just absolutely beautiful. There are small projects like pillows and table runners, wall hangings, and then there are also larger quilts that you'll find in this book. I'm going to start now and just tell you about each of the 12 projects in the book. Okay, so the first quilt in the book is called Whimsy Stars, and it is a fun fat quarters quilt that is super easy to put together. We used Bonnie and Camille fabrics for this, and my daughter Chelsea actually helped me do some of the cutting and piecing for this quilt. Finishes at a really nice size, 66.5 inches by 78.5 inches. Next up is the Scrappy Dresden's Table Runner, and I used a combination of our fabrics for this table runner, mostly Harper's Garden mixed in with some of our other fabrics. The table runner finishes at 14.5 inches by 41.5 inches. And it uses scraps and small squares. You can use charm squares to make the Dresden blades and the Dresden center circles. So this is a really scrap-friendly project that you'll be able to make from your stash. Next up is the Farmhouse Garden Quilt. And this is one of my favorites. I used the Urban Farmhouse Gatherings collection by Primitive Gatherings for this quilt and had a lot of fun. This is a fun 9-patch quilt. It finishes up at 68.25 inches by 68.25 inches, and it also uses fat quarters. You could also make this quilt using a couple of jelly rolls. I used fat quarters so I could make sure to get the color combinations that I needed, but this is definitely a jelly roll friendly quilt. Next up is Sherbet Cream, which is a string-pieced quilt. And I actually have a video tutorial here on the YouTube channel that you can watch to learn how to make these blocks. They are a lot of fun. This was a work in progress that I'd had for several years when I decided to finish it up for this book. And the quilt finishes up at 33.5 by 44.5, which makes it a perfect baby size quilt, and it's also really easily to make this one larger, and that video will tell you everything you know about making these blocks. Next up is a 17 by 17 inch pillow family tree, and it has a really fun scrappy tree block, and I again used our fabrics for this project and just kind of used a scrappy mix. There's something fun I'll be showing you soon with this block as well. But but I believe with the borders and everything, it did finish at 17 inches by 17 inches, but I used an 18-inch pillow form to really fill it out and give it a fun look. And there are instructions in the book as well for how to make the zipper pillow back that I used. This is a technique that I use all the time, and I've also filmed a YouTube video on this technique, and that's the way you finish this pillow in the book. The next quilt is Cottage Charm, and this is also a fat quarter quilt, and it finishes at 72.5 inches by 72.5 inches. And this is probably the most beginner-friendly quilt in the book. An absolute brand new beginner could make this quilt. And you just pick 18 of your favorite fat quarters, and then there's some cream for the inner border and an outer border fabric and binding. But this one is super easy to construct, super easy to put together, and as I mentioned, very easy. This could be your first quilt. The next project in the book is one I'm really excited about. It's a wall hanging called Window Box, and it finishes at 31.5 inches by 29.5 inches, and it uses grandmother's flower garden blocks. And I do have a YouTube video on also how to make these blocks, and they're put together on a fun, scrappy 4-patch background that really adds a lot. And you only have to make 8 blocks to make this fun wall hanging. So if you're thinking about trying out grandmother's flower garden blocks, this is a really great quilt to just kind of test the waters and see what you think about these blocks. As I mentioned, there are great instructions in the book, but I also have a YouTube video on how to construct this. The next project is called Harmony, and this is a 53 3/8 by 53 3/8 quilt. I have the blocks set on point. They look really great in a straight setting as well, so you could easily adapt this one. This would make a great wall hanging or table topper, actually. And I used Minnick & Simpson fabrics from their Northport collection, but their collections all have this fun vintagey red, white, and blue vibe, and so their more recent collection that is out now would also be beautiful to make for this quilt. There's also a baby quilt layout in the book with 12 blocks that you could make that is super fun. Next up is one of my favorites. This is a log cabin block. It's completely scrappy. It has fabrics that were in my collection for years, along with some of my newest fabrics at the time I did the book. It's called Laguna, and it finishes up at 56.5 by 64.5, and you could easily make this quilt bigger or smaller. And I also have a video that you can watch on this for how to use the log cabin trim tool to really simplify the construction on this block and make sure that your blocks are absolutely square. The next project is called Garden Path, and this is another one of the more simple projects in the book. This is actually a fat eighth quilt, so you can easily use scraps for this, or a fat eighth bundle. You need at least 20 different fat eighths for this. It finishes up at 52.5 by 63.5, making it the perfect size for a lap quilt just to have on your couch for a nice throw. And as I mentioned, the blocks are super simple. It's mostly rectangles and squares with just a few half square triangles. So this is another quilt that you'd want to try if you were a beginner to new quilter. The next quilt is called Sunshine, and this quilt was pieced with fabrics by Corey Yoder, and it's a fun take on a star block. This is actually a layer cake quilt, so you can use 30 different 10-inch by 10-inch squares for the blocks. So, and you'll be surprised, that layer cake, it really makes a nice size quilt. 58.5 by 68.5 inches is the finished size. And so is also, I'd say, confident beginner to intermediate. Half square triangles, squares, and rectangles. And since there is sashing between the blocks, it makes it a little bit more forgiving and easy to put together. The final quilt in the book is called Sorbet, and I really just wanted to do one quilt in the book that was just an easy strip-pieced quilt pattern. This pattern is perfect for mixing your extra jelly roll strips left over from another project, strips that you cut from fat quarters, and it does have 2 different sizes of strips, which I think is really fun, gives it a little bit more interest. But you can also mix and match different size strips and kind of do your own thing with this one. The fabrics I used were the really, really soft fabrics that Moda puts out. I hadn't sewn with them yet, and I was super interested in how they would go together. And so it's also a great quilt for something like a flannel, where the fabric is a little bit more bulky perhaps. Since there aren't a lot of tricky seams, this would make a great flannel quilt for you. The fabrics I used were a cross weave from Moda. So they're just absolutely soft and beautiful. And the fabrics in this quilt are also from Corey Yoder. I hope you enjoyed learning just a little bit more about the quilts in Labor of Love, Scrappy Quilts at the Heart of Home. I do have this book for pre-order in my Etsy shop now. You can get an autographed copy. It's also available now for pre-order on Amazon. And of course, you can purchase Sunday Best Quilts now on Amazon and in my Etsy shop as well. And I will have links for both books in the description, and also links to blog posts where you can get information about the Sunday Best Quilt sampler and about all of the Labor of Love quilts. I hope you enjoyed this and that you'll subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thanks so much for stopping by.